Hi, I'm Dr. Gemma, and welcome back to Cognitive, the Knitting Psychology podcast. Cheerfully and somewhat irregularly in business since 2008. Segments today may include what's on my hooks, needles, and spindles, a strategy, something I really like, put a lid on it, oh shoot, and blather. So sit back, put your feet up, pick up your knitting, crocheting, spinning, weaving, or dyeing, or any other yarny thing you're doing, and get ready to enjoy. Well, hello there. It's Dr. Gemma, and welcome back to the Cognitive Podcast. We are here at episode 113. It is 6:13 p.m. on Monday, January 16th, 2023. Did I get that right? And your comments are always welcome. You can comment on our blog at cognitivepodcast.blogspot.com, or you can go to the Cognitive group. I think it's the Cognitive Podcast group on Ravelry. I'm not sure which it is, but you'll figure it out. At any rate, please remember not adding anybody to my social media accounts because of robo accounts, but you can follow me in the ways I just told you. That's really all I'm keeping up with anyway. In the Warm Thanks League, we had a bunch of comments. First of all, welcome back, Turbo Gal. I didn't realize you had absented yourself. It's really nice to have you back. Thank you for your warm congratulations. That was a very kind post. And also, welcome to the Romule Cow, even if you're a little late. And I appreciate the idea that you're using your stash to make socks on your sock machine. I have always been tempted by sock machines, and I know as I age, if I start losing the power to knit, I have one in my future because I just think it's a great idea to crank out fast socks. I don't want to because I enjoy the hand knitting. I don't need the production to be that quick, but my socks are slowly aging. I was looking at how many of them are getting a bit felty tonight, and so yes, I think it's a great idea. And yes, here in Minnesota, January and February are the deep winter months. Oh, my sister, I lived in southeast Washington near the Idaho border. I so hear your song. Here it comes with darkness and a lot of snow shoveling. I like the idea of Romule getting me through to March, through the deep winter. I think that's a wonderful point. I'm just going to elaborate a little bit. When I lived in southeast Washington state, I had a huge house, and most of the time it was me there alone, till eventually my husband moved in. But it took us a while to work out getting married and all that. And I had a bedroom devoted simply to sewing. What a luxury, with a table that I'm looking at right now that extended to 8 feet. I just had such a good time in there. I had an ironing board set up and my machine was never covered and I just cranked out stuff. It was wonderful. What we all did in southeast Washington was we lived at the Joann's store, which was right across the state line in southwestern Idaho. Is that right? No, just at the base of the panhandle of Idaho, I would say the stovepipe. At any rate, we went to the Joann's in Moscow, Idaho, even lower sales tax, I tell you, than Washington. And we all bought quilting fabric. And the Joann's knew it was there for the quilters. I also began to sew my own clothes there. But in the winter, what everybody did who quilted, and there were quite a few of us, was we would all get together and quilt. Now, I didn't have a sewing machine that did quilting. So what you did was all summer long, when it was hot and kind of sticky and we didn't have air conditioning, we would cut and piece. And you'd try to get one good quilt top, and we were all doing bed-size stuff, the group I was in. You'd try to get one good quilt top at least by the end of the summer. And again, I wasn't one to use a lot of machine. I did a lot of hand applique, a lot of that stuff. But anyway, you'd get one good quilt top. And you would sandwich the layers, and you would baste the layers, and then you would do the edging and get the backing and the edging on. And then all winter long, we would sit in front of the TV, both channels. I'm not making that up. And this was the early 90s, guys. And we would quilt. And I would do all my hand quilting all winter, crouching on my big sofa, lying under this big unfinished quilt. And I would just spend the winter months hand quilting the squares. And I would do it very systematically. First, I'd get the corners done so that there was actual quilting. And then I would go back to the patterns in the squares and add more. So I would do the long lines, the long seams between the squares and between the rows. And then I would go back and hand quilt all the little details. I know what you're talking about, Turbo Gal. That's what I'm telling you. Stay warm. Prairie Poet also, I didn't mention you. Thank you for the congrats on the Therapist Award, too. I really do appreciate that. Oh, by the way, I want to point out, thank you, Turbo Gal, another Ceylon tea fan. Yes, although I really am glad you're going to tune in on the Plum Deluxe Eggnog. That's an oolong with eggnog, and you'll just love it if you like the delicate flavors. It really, really is sensational. I'll get to the Don't Know Yet progress. DC Lane Knits, would you please get better? You're starting to scare us. And Karen, RS75, thank you for pointing out that Alpaca Direct was doing a Technique Tuesday knitting the brick sweater. I can't think, Wool Needles Knit or Wool Needles Yarn. She does a vlog on YouTube. She also was recommending the brick as a basic starter. And so I have to say, the whole point of the brick is to have a template. And hopefully I'll remember to come back to that when I talk about what's on my hooks and needles. Because I think the template thing has gotten really important to me this week. Have we caught anybody else in here that I need to thank? Yeah, okay, so DC Lane Knits is getting a little bit better as we write. Okay, so let's get into the bulk of it now. Thank you, everybody. I really like your comments, as you can tell. It's very meaningful to me, and I really appreciate it when I hear from you. So warm thanks to all of you for the comments, and I really enjoyed it. In the meantime, COVID, I don't know if I should keep doing this segment. I think at this point, either you're an idiot or you're vaccinated, and I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but at this point, hundreds of millions of people have more than one vaccine. I mean, how much can you resist the evidence? It's safe. I was really shocked when Mr. Hamlin, the football player, got hurt, and people were actually saying they thought he had this because of COVID inoculation. No, guys. Please go look it up. I actually talked to a doctor about it. He said it's a heart rate rhythm thing, which I vaguely remember from my days back doing physiology, that you have several different wavelengths in your heartbeat. And if you disrupt what's called the T, as in Thomas wavelength, you stop the heart. And they think that's what he did. It is really a 1 in a million thing. It's usually something that happens to much younger people, like teenagers playing baseball who get hit in the chest with a baseball. It'll happen to them. We did have one such death in my neighborhood when I was a kid. I do remember it very clearly. So, yeah, no, really, you know the drill. Take care of yourselves, guys. And I still have the links up because, again, you want to get your free COVID tests. You want to, if you live in California, have an electronic record that you can get free online. You want to do all that good stuff, and you want to get your kids vaccinated. So, having said all that, let's get down to my hooks and needles. I am proud to say that I have finished 2 Romule hats. That these were made from the leftovers of my scraps. Now, the first one, I knitted really quick, and I was feeling really frantic. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it was during my working week. It's okay. I'm not pleased with it. I just don't like the way the colors came together. Somehow, when I put it on, it just looked a little strange. I think it's because I started dark at the bottom and dark at the top, and it looks like a bullseye with very weird striping from the top. But it's a perfectly good hat. And then the sequel, I really had these little bits and bobs of yarn. And I mean, by little bits and bobs, 2 yards, 3 yards, really short pieces, just tiny little balls. And I wasn't thinking about that. I had them all in this basket that I've been keeping my Romule sweater yarns in this basket, a very pretty basket with a cloth liner. And I was knitting my Romule sweater out of that basket. And so there it was, this cute little basket full of these little tiny yarn balls. And I didn't throw them out for reasons I can't explain. Because normally I would just look at this thing. I mean, they are, when you wind it into a ball, it is about as thick as the knuckle of my thumb. I mean, it really isn't very much. But I kept them around, and I'm really glad I did. Because this time I felt like I had less yarn. And so I started to experiment with Fair Isle, and oh, was this fun. So I went to two books. One was Alice Starmore's book on Fair Isle knitting, and the second is Mary Jane Mucklestone's 200 Fair Isle Motifs, a knitter's directory. I browsed through Starmore. She does have patterns. She has a lot of big ones, but I think Mucklestone's book is a little more organized for what I wanted it to do. So I really relied on Mucklestone's book, but I would recommend Starmore's book if you want to learn about knitting colorwork sweaters. It really is remarkable. Both good books to have in your permanent library. So I roamed through Mucklestone, and I began to really enjoy the art of Fair Isle. And so I just took these little tiny balls, and I got ready. Now first, I did knit 4 inches of 2x2 ribbing for the bottom of the watch cap that I was knitting. And the watch cap that I was knitting is actually the Siemens Church watch cap. So using that as a base, boy did I learn a lot from this project. First off, since the brim of the watch cap will be folded up, I did not want to put anything too exotic on those bottom rows, but I also did want to get through all these little bits and bobs. So I chose patterns for Fair Isle that were 2 rows high and usually 2 or 4 stitches wide. No big deal there. You learn a lot from those guys. If you have enough yarn to stripe, you have enough yarn to do Fair Isle. In other words, so you do a stripe of red and a stripe of blue, for example. Okay, and you can do that, and you'll get a nice red stripe and a nice blue stripe. Or you can do a 2-row Fair Isle pattern where you will get an alternating piece of color work in red and blue, like a checkerboard would be one example, but not the only possibility. That's a lot of fun, and it makes the knit more interesting. And it's going to teach you about your tension. Now, I do Fair Isle by having one yarn in one hand and the other yarn in the other hand. And then my right hand knits English and my left hand knits Continental. That's a learning experience. I found out my English is much tighter than my Continental. So when I do Fair Isle, I have to work at loosening up the English. I have to sort of relax my right hand and let more yarn play through it, which you learn over time. It's just a skill. There are plenty of other ways to do Fair Isle. You can buy a little plastic ring with a hook on it that you put on your left hand if you knit Continental, or on your right if you knit English, and you just put one yarn through that and the other yarn you're using right across your fingers like you normally would. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I think the Portuguese knitting style also has a way to do this, but I'm not going to go there because I'm not that familiar. At any rate, so this is really fun. It's a new thing. It's a skill you can master, and it's never going to be safer than knitting a hat in the round, let me tell you. The other thing I learned was what I kind of already knew. My Fair Isle tension is a little bit tighter than the tension if I were just doing stockinette. That's not a big surprise, is it? No. So I did realize that I did this hat on the needles I've used before with this pattern, which were a 7 and an 8. If I were doing it over, I would do this hat on a 7 for the ribbing and a 9 for the body. That I would give the Fair Isle a little bigger needle to loosen up that tension a little bit. The hat does fit, even before blocking, although I think blocking will also help it to relax a bit. But it worked really, really nicely. It's a very handsome hat. I've got to add a good picture of it. I tried to show you, though, pictures of the sides of it in progress. If you look at the first picture, that's a better indication of the colors. The second picture was taken by lamplight, and it looks more steel gray than blue. It's a very, very blue hat. Believe me, it's not steel gray. But you can, if you look at the second picture, you'll notice at the top there's a Fair Isle of hearts with a light stripe through it. And I did not do the best color matching, but you will see the hearts if you look. And I'm very pleased because that was another lesson I learned about color quality and color value when you do Fair Isle. And I kind of knew this, but I really wanted to experiment with it, and I figured the best way is to make mistakes and look at the mistakes, because the hat becomes a kind of sampler. Remember this. In other words, remember that you have to go for, when you're using one color for the outer stripe, one color for the inner stripe, and the hearts are a design spread across both. And I know you're all going, duh, out there. the hearts have to be in a third value, and it has to be a high enough contrast. It has to be like a middle value between the bright stripe and the dark stripe. But I did want to see what will happen if I try this, and what would the pattern look like even if you can't see the hearts. And I'm satisfied with it. It still is fun. So I learned a lot from that. The other great thing was, wow, I did not know how small of a scrap you can use. Well, this is a hat. It's not that big. If you can wrap the scrap of yarn around your head twice, you're going to get at least one 2-row pattern using another yarn. Remember, Fair Isle is defined as 2 colors per row. No more, no less. Now, you may go to color 3 on the next row. Like you may do colors 1 and 2 on the first row. And then the second row can be colors 2 and 3. You don't have to stick to the same 2 colors, in other words. And some of the best Fair Isle special effects are when you change background color while you're keeping a foreground pattern, or when you use a variegated against a more solid background. You get some really neat special effects with Fair Isle, let me tell you. So this was a really great experience in how small your scraps can be to be used up. And it was a bit shocking. And I'm really, really happy about that for a number of reasons. This week, my focus has not only been on scraps, but on how we use and recycle clothes. I'm not going to do a lot about that, but it's all kind of a piece in my head right now that I'm looking at this hat and I'm thinking, I'm really glad that those little bits of yarn are in my hat being used instead of in my trash can, at risk of being swallowed by Minerva or spending their days on some landfill in the Hudson River or in the Pacific. So, this has been a wonderful experience looking at how to do Fair Isle. And I really suspect my next sweater, unless it's primarily hand spun, because I don't have the color range in my hand spun, but if I have the color range, I suspect my next sweater is going to include Fair Isle. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. I've always liked doing color work. And the hats were a sharp reminder that I can experiment and be just as free with Fair Isle as I've been designing my sweaters from my hand spun and my scraps. So this is really a lovely thing to look forward to. And I'm very pleased with the way this hat came out. This is Romeo hat the second. Romeo hat the first, not so excited, but a very wearable hat. Either we'll give it to charity or we'll wear it around the house. So that was really good. And again, some really good lessons in Fair Isle, in tensioning, in needle sizes, in how small a scrap can actually be incorporated into Fair Isle, in variation on patterns, in playing with color. I can't tell you, it's just been such a rewarding hat. For 3 days, it was just exciting to be working my way up this hat and seeing what I could see. And it came out looking just great. In progress, well, no love on anything except the Don't Know Yet. I did a little tiny bit of seaming on the short seams on, I think it's row 6. Is that right? Of the Don't Know Yet. I'm very happy about that. And I've got the bottom chunk of it sitting here next to me. It's quite large. It makes a nice lap blanket, although it's not very deep. It's very wide. And so that's just plugging along. What was really good to discover was I really do have good yarn for seaming. I was very worried, do I have too little? Do I have too much? And the other thing is I've got a lot more space in this study. I mean, there's more work to go clearing this out, but I am pleased with the floor space I have regained. And this weekend I also organized the books in here. And that was extremely satisfying, and that would not have been possible without getting all that yarn for the Don't Know Yet into a more usable form. So that's been going very, very nicely. The others, I really am debating what I want to turn to next. That after the excitement and the push of the Romeo project, I really feel sort of disorganized about my crafting. So I may just spend a few quiet days working on the Don't Know Yet seams while I kind of shuffle what I want to do. I just don't feel a lot of excitement about doing any of my other projects, and I think I just need to kind of get over all that. But we're plugging along and we're happy. I have terrible startitis. The fact that I've got the makings of a simply beautiful shawl and a great pair of socks sitting on my desk, it ain't helping me. It ain't helping me at all. My favorite resources are all listed where they belong, and you know them. And yes, I do have Alpaca Direct on that list. You got it, Karen. Dizzy Blondes, I'm going along with the Minerva project. I'm looking at it now as I sit here on its spindle, and I think there was a picture of the spindle in the last episode or 2 episodes back. Doesn't look much different because there's very little every day. It's just this little puff ball. But I let 4 of them build up today, and that was a lot more fun, I have to admit, to just spin that much of it instead of going in these little tiny increments. What do I have? I would guess about 20 yards. Not a lot. This is a very slow project. I'm really pleased about it, though, because I have the silk for the project spun. And I have no idea how much I have of it, but it's on a big, long spindle. Well, the same spindle I'm using for the Minerva fur. When it was on that, it was huge, and I wound it around a toilet paper roll, and it's quite a lot. And I'm happy with it. That, in other words, I will be pleased just to sort of stop and ply those together and see how much I get someday. But I want this to be a very slow project. Why? Okay, it's true, I miss the don't know yet. And the don't know yet was a reaction to missing the temperature blanket. These year-long projects are immensely satisfying to me. Yeah, there was one I didn't see coming, but just very slowly working through your stuff and watching this incremental build-up. I think because it's as close as knitting gets to quilting, to be honest. There's that same thing where you begin to realize when you quilt enough that you really like the whole process. That there's this sort of piece-by-piece excitement. And so these long projects are having that effect on me. Wow, I didn't see that coming. I always thought I'm this sort of get as many, production knitter, get as much done as fast as you can. But no, I'm really enjoying it. Today was also laundry day for my socks, so I put them in the washing machine. Yes, I don't use anything but superwash. So I put it on hand wash in cool water, and I really like it. My machine works very well. And of course you don't put them in the dryer. They just spin dry. They soak and they spin dry. And it's really nice. And then I take them and I put them on the clothes rack that is now in my bedroom. And I just enjoy doing this, that I wait until I have about 25 pairs and then wash them all at once. And it is so fun, but it's also a really great way to inventory your socks, which I do not need any more of, let me tell you. The strategies. Okay, so we're back to interpersonal strategies. This is one of the core ideas of dialectical behavioral therapy, alias DBT. Now, when we do interpersonal strategies, like all DBT, the 3 main branches of DBT are the interpersonal strategies, distress tolerance, and emotional management, or what I think of as long-term mental health practices to manage your emotion over the long time. Okay. And interpersonal is usually the last thing we teach because usually it's not nearly as needed as distress tolerance, especially. But here we are in interpersonal strategies. And like the other 2 legs of DBT, it relies heavily on radical acceptance. So there's a reason I'm always circling back and talking about radical acceptance. If you're going to deal with other people, if you're going to learn to ask for what you want, if you're going to learn to deal with conflict, you first have to start considering who you are in an argument or in a problem or in a tense situation. The first rule is don't get engaged in an interpersonal interaction if you're strung out, if you're upset, if you're freaked out, okay? So the first reality is if somebody hurts you and you feel you need to talk to them about it, or if there's a problem and you need to talk to someone about it, for heaven's sake, this is the E, by the way, from accepts in distress tolerance. Manage your emotion before you manage the problem. So before I teach you about how to talk to other people, sure, I've told you, dear man, and fast. But before you apply those, it is really critical that you know who you are. You have an idea of, wait, I am too upset to talk about this, or I am really okay talking about this. And it is okay to be who you are in these situations. There are very few situations in this life where you have to immediately respond, and that's called a crisis. Even if you feel like it's a crisis, you have to really think, if I don't respond immediately, what's going to happen? Most of the time, pretty good things. Most of the time, if I'm upset and I don't respond immediately, that's a great idea, because I should pull myself together so that I can interact appropriately with the other person. Why is this radical acceptance? Because you have to know how you react. And this is so key to me. This has been so important in my life that you can be blindsided. A lot of people blindside you when they're angry at you or when they want to get something from you and they think you're going to be able to fend them off. They'll come up with this wild statement and just throw you off balance, okay? The first thing you have to know is, what's my strategy for being off balance? And boy, I can speak to this painfully because I've had to learn this the hard way over several jobs. So, when you're off balance, if somebody's throwing you off balance and you realize it, the first thing you need to realize that this was probably not an accident. If I've been thrown off balance intentionally by another person, what they're going after means they think they have to cheat a little bit. They have to ruin my defenses to come after what they want. So when you're blindsided, the first rule is don't. You need to stop. You need to say, oh, wait. And you can just say it. I didn't expect that. I need a minute to think about that. And the other person, if they're really playing dirty, they'll push you. No, I need my answer now. But most of the time they don't. There's very few true crises. So I would warn you that you need to know who you are. You need to know how well you can function when you're blindsided. I'm pretty mentally quick, but even I can be blindsided, trust me. I'm just used to being the fastest mind in a lot of conversations. I don't know, pardon my ego, but I've had a lot of practice, guys. I'm old. But the reality is anyone can be blindsided. And so if you're being blindsided, odds are high that's not the friendliest of approaches, and you need to be aware of that the other person's motivations may not be friendly. And you also need to know that it's time to buy time. It's time to walk away and regroup and think about it. So you need to know that. You also need to know, what if you panic? What if you're upset about this interaction? Well, first of all, you need to rehearse. And that's a big part of radical acceptance as a part of interpersonal strategies. If you're going to talk to somebody about a difficult topic, you have to rehearse. You don't just walk up and trust to the fates. You have to just practice it. And as you practice, you have to do worst case scenario. What's the worst they can say to me? What would I do if they said that worst to me? Now, of course, this is where blindsiding gets big. A lot of times when you've rehearsed, somebody blindsides you. They come up with a point you never thought of. Maybe they're not being mean at all. They just have a point you missed. So also you can consult. That if you're stuck in a difficult situation and you need to talk to somebody, run it by someone you trust. Ask them for their thoughts. Tell them how you're thinking of approaching the situation. And for heaven's sake, listen to your consultant. You should have people who you trust, who you believe in, who you think would be a good consultant, and you need to listen to them. So before we go back to the real nitty-gritty of interpersonal strategies, first strategy is know who you are. By the way, that also means know your reactions. If you get hurt by the other person in an interaction, what do you do? What do you typically do? Can you change that? One of the real groundbreaking things for me was to realize that I would often personalize so much that the other person was watching that, and I was making them nervous because they could see me beginning to suffer. So one of the tricks I learned is if someone doesn't give me what I want, I learned to swallow my pride, to choke it back, and to say, hey, okay, I see your point. I'm not giving up yet, but I need to think about what you've said because I can see what you're saying. And to basically show good sportsmanship, to show that if I don't get what I want, and I don't want to say if I lose, because that is too personal. It's just a matter of, can I get what I want? No, let me regroup. And so you want the other person to realize that they can disagree with you, and they can preserve the relationship with you, and they have not hurt you in this irremediable way. Okay, so you need to realize, who are you when you get disappointed? And you need to learn, if you can, to counter that. To think of what's the best way to show disappointment to the other person without blaming or guilt or anger. What is the way that they can respect? Because you're going to need to come back to them. If you're not giving up, you're going to need to come back to this person. Okay, so the radical acceptance. Know who you are. Know what you're like when you win. Know what you're like when you lose. Know how to buy time. Ask for more time to think something out. Know that most situations are not crises, and you probably can manage them if you're managing yourself. And additionally, rehearsal. Know what you're going to say going in. And that really helps me, by the way. If I'm really scared of a confrontation, and that does happen, not so much anymore, but it happens, usually when I hear myself repeating the words that I rehearsed, I immediately get confidence. Okay, so rehearsal, but also consultation. And consultation can include rehearsal. And I will often do this with a patient. If they have a difficult meeting, I will go over with them, what do you think you want to say? What do you think would be important here? And I will listen to them and I will say, you know what would be more effective? Could you try this? That would impress me more. You need to think about it, but what does this sound like to you? So consultation with rehearsal, these are great things to know. Okay, so that's the latest interpersonal strategy. Know yourself in the forms of work on your radical acceptance, your rehearsal, and your consultation, including identifying the person with whom you can consult and rehearse. Fluffy books land. I'm trapped in the middle of one of the Lynn Messina books because I picked up another series. I still like them. I'm still enjoying the Beatrice Hyde Clare. There's 11 of them, and I think I'm on like number 9. So I'm kind of motivated to slow it down a little bit. Okay, so a long time ago I listened to the beginning of a book called, I am not joking, called Pemberley, Mr. Darcy's Dragon, in the Jane Austen's Dragons series. Stupid idea, you say? Well, that's what I said. And the first chapter was just unbearable. It was so badly written. So this week I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to go to sleep with my books. And for some reason, Jane Austen, as I'm listening on my earphones, my sleep earphones didn't cut it. And I accidentally turned on Pemberley, Mr. Darcy's Dragon. Worst audible narration I have ever heard. The guy doing it is dreadful. But I thought, well, this will put me to sleep. So instead of using the dreadful narrator, I went into Alexa and I had her narrate it. And I went off to sleep. The shocker is I woke up in the middle of it and it wasn't quite as bad. So I'm embarrassed to admit this. I got the sequel, Longbourn, or Longburn, if you're American, and I listened to that. And it's actually pretty good. Why? Because the author gets down to what she wants to do. She can't keep relying on quotes and plot from Pride and Prejudice. And it actually is pretty good once she gets there. That, sure, this isn't Lizzie and Darcy. It's a pretty good imitation. And it's a little annoying because she's using characters and settings. It's not original in that respect. But of course, this frees her up to do the dragon stuff. The dragon stuff is a lot of fun. It's goofy. This book has no redeeming value, but it's just goofy fun. So I listened to the third one, Netherfield, and it was hilarious. It's so goofy. But I'm enjoying the Jane Austen's Dragons series, I am embarrassed to admit. I gotta tell you, some of the writing is still so dreadful. I'm 3 books in. Every character in every scene, somebody's going to scrub their face with their hand, run their face through their hand, or run their hand over their face, chew on a knuckle, or run their fingers through their hair. It's really horrible. It's so funny. You just figure these characters must walk around, their knuckles must be covered in scabs from chewing on their knuckles all the time. And I can't imagine what Mr. Darcy would do if Lizzie kept scrubbing her face with her hand. Can I tell you something about the Regency era? They did not do those gestures. They did not do those gestures. This is one of those things we don't tend to know here in the 21st century. I don't know when this began, but you have to realize the Middle Ages onward, the upper class and later the middle class as it develops are actually really good hygienically. We have this myth of dirty people in the days before electric lights, and I don't even want to go into how that got started. But actually, in the Middle Ages, they wash their hands frequently in the middle of meals. They keep water bowls on the table to do it, okay? And because they eat with their fingers. And while they do not, through much of this time, have a really good idea of germ theory, they do understand that illness spreads by contact. They just don't know why. Hello, we're waiting for, what was his name, Leeuwenhoek, to come up with the microscope in, I want to say, the 16th century. My History of science is getting old. Anyway, these people are not dirty. As a result, one of the things, particularly in Jane Austen's class and above, one of the things that's really important, don't touch your food with your hands. Don't touch your face with your hands. They do understand that you communicate illness in some way. This would keep them all from getting a lot of head colds, because colds spread really easily by touching contacted surfaces and then touching a mucous membrane or somewhere on your face. Okay, so all these people chewing on their knuckles and scrubbing their face with their hands. No. And I love the way the author makes this big claim at the end about how she does all this research. I've got to write to her and say, please, madam, stop it. They know better. They wouldn't be chewing their knuckles. That's an incredibly low-class thing to do in their era. They'd be embarrassed if they were caught doing it. And they certainly aren't putting their hands all over their faces or in their hair and then all over their faces. They wouldn't be doing it. Ooh, I really hate it when people miss historical detail. Thank you for your forbearance. In the meantime, I finally watched the notorious Netflix version of Jane Austen's Persuasion, made in 2022. And I have to tell you, I enjoyed it. It's not Persuasion. Once you let go of the fact, no, this is so not Anne Elliot. This is so not the way they would behave. It's very 21st century in its humor, in Anne's behaviors. It's really embarrassing how off the mark and how unhistorical the behaviors are. So why did I enjoy it? A number of things. The biggest thing, the cast is integrated racially. And again, as in Bridgerton, I really like it. When you just start seeing normality as people of all different skin colors, it's really nice, because it's more like our world. And I'm having a bad moment here, because all I can think of is being raised in this Catholic school, and all the statues of Jesus and Mary are white. And by the way, yeah, white Catholic school, I should be clear. And it's making me laugh, because there was that moment where we all figured out that, well, if the story is true, Jesus is Middle Eastern. He's probably not paper white, and I bet his mother wasn't either. And this is what makes me laugh, because this is how you indoctrinate people, that you just convert everything into white. And I mean indoctrinate everybody, that you're affecting people who aren't white, when you do this, okay? So it is really nice to see these integrated shows. And of course, in Persuasion, they're not going to talk about race that I can recall. And so you don't have to explain it, it just is. It gets a little more awkward in Bridgerton, where they try to talk about the interracial stuff, and they don't really take it on. They just kind of hint at it, that it might be problematic, which, again, it makes me edgy, because once you start talking about it, you've got to say, if you're a wealthy person in the Regency, your money's coming out of slavery in the West Indies, and if you're a person of color, that's awkward. And again, Sanditon tries to go at it by making the one person of color in the cast into an activist when she finds out where the money's coming from, which I respect. Okay, and Sanditon, I don't remember Sanditon having issues of race or class in it. The one that does is Mansfield Park, where Austen actively has the heroine question her kindly uncle about, aren't we getting our money from slavery? And the moment goes by very quickly, but it's a considerable act of courage on Austen's part. And it's partly because the idea of Mansfield Park is very related to the idea of Thackeray's Vanity Fair, but I'm not going to go there right now. Okay, so we've got this integrated cast, and that is really nice. And it's nice, too, I think, in many respects. It results in some better performance. It humanizes a lot of the characters. Now, of course, they're not speaking a lot of Regency lingo. They're doing a lot of 21st century type of statements and 21st century language. Even so, it finally opens up Austen to a different style of performance and action, and I really, really enjoyed that. The other thing is, the actors are adorable. The guy playing Wentworth, oh no, he walks around with his mouth hanging open. It's just a very weird look. I don't know where they got him from. Apparently he's a pop singer of some sort. But walking around with the mouth hanging open is very strange. But you get to like him as time goes on. What I would tell you is they try to interpret it. The director's really, or whoever's writing the screenplay, is really interpreting Austen. And sometimes they're very right, and sometimes they're very wrong. It does result in some very winning moments in the story. Anne Elliot's younger sister marries the guy Anne could have married, the local gentry. And I believe her name is Mary. I'm hoping I'm getting the sisters right, that the younger one is Mary. And anyway, she just comes on the screen and says, I'm an unapologetic narcissist. The woman playing her is terrific. She plays that role with absolute devotion and gusto. And the highlight of every scene is when that character walks into it, that she is so good at it. And she says things about, like, my coach has recommended, my life coach has recommended I do such and such. Very 21st century. So what would I tell you about Persuasion 2022 on Netflix? It ain't the book. It ain't the book. It's not Austen, but it is hilarious. I would call it Austen for dummies, written by dummies, but kind of lovable. So if you're not insanely devoted to an earlier version of Persuasion, I am, to the earliest version I know of, which I want to say is 95. If you're not insanely devoted to that one, and you can bear to watch Anne turn into kind of an idiot, who is also a bit alcoholic. She spends a lot of time just getting drunk on wine and talking about how she needs it to get over her pain of losing Wentworth, which makes me just cringe for the original character. Even so, if you can get over that, it is hilarious. Persuasion 2022. Just don't take it as serious, Austen. It's a miss in that respect. But, oh yes, the other thing, the scenery, they try to save money on the lime scenes, which I find annoying. A lot of productions do that. They're pretty much not in lime except for one moment. And I'm not even sure if that's provably in lime or on a seawall somewhere else. I found that a bit annoying. This is a very compressed version of Persuasion. So you have to kind of live with cuts like that. They really, really compress it in places. But actually they do a pretty good job if it wasn't for the really screwy dialogue. Oh, I will stop. The other thing I watched was The Wonder on Netflix, and that is a 2 thumbs down. Oh boy. Oh boy. I can't believe someone got away with making this. First of all, there's a really unpleasant genre in English literature called, wait for it, we English civilize the rest of you. And yeah, I just heard a number of you scream for various reasons, okay? And The Wonder fits into it. It's set in 1862. Basically, it's the story about how an English nurse with the unstated but obvious Anglican spiritual background goes in and sets the Catholics straight. That's okay, they're Irish. So, we know the Irish are really not civilized. I was so appalled by this. I was really just appalled by it. And there's also the poor class. They really can't be trusted with their own children. We should take their children away. That comes into it. It was just everything wrong. The director opens it with some kind of apology like, hey, we know these people are sincere about their beliefs. No, if you have to say that at the beginning of a film, you probably shouldn't make the film. And again, the director tries to remove us from the action by showing us the stripped down sets and having an actress, I believe the director is male, but has an actress come on and talk about how this is just, not the real world. And it's like, look, you cannot remove this enough. If you have to keep apologizing this way and removing the audience from the action in the way you're doing it, you're just implying that you're being offensive. And they are. I'm not Irish. I'm not really all that Catholic, but I was offended on their behalf. I can't even tell you how many ways this movie goes wrong. Let's see. We try to have the rational Irishman. He's a doctor. Oh, wait. He wants to say that the little girl is not doing a miracle, but she's got magnetism, whereas the hardcore English female nurse says, don't be ridiculous. And she's the only one using scientific method. Oh, God, I was embarrassed. I was just embarrassed. Thank God that English woman came in to save all those stupid, ignorant, barbaric Catholic Irishmen. Oh, God. I was just, there's so much wrong with it. Now, in the end, there's one good moment. The trick that the nurse uses to her last interaction with the little girl. I'm just going to put it that way. I don't want to give spoilers. I should, because you really shouldn't watch this crap. But anyway, that's like it. There's one great moment in the film. Is this based on history? Yes and no. The way that the fasting is being carried out, that has been documented, that people did that I'm not, like I said, avoiding spoilers. Is this story historic? Not that I know of. I think it's a fiction, but oh God, was it offensive. And really, English literature has a wonderful history. It does not have to add to its own story by doing these embarrassing, thank God the English came to save us types of stories. We can all do a whole lot better than that. Okay, so I would say The Wonder on Netflix, give that a miss. I sat through it. I just had to see, is this as bad as I think? Is this going to get worse? It did. It did not let me down. Something I really like, I got a really neat little tool from Amazon. It costs like $9. It's an electric lighter. It is not a butane lighter. It has no fuel. It actually charges. And then you slide one slider and it shows you the battery life, and then you press on a button. It has two tiny little electrodes, and you see a little light between them, like a little wire of light, and you stick your candle wick into that wire and it ignites it. Why do I like this? Long charge. It uses up when you're lighting candles. So when you have a new candle and the wick is coated in wax, that can take a minute to melt the wax, and it will burn down the charge on the lighter. But I really like having this lighter that can uncharge and charge. I like the fact it's not kid-friendly. It takes some doing to figure out how to work it. So I don't feel like my kid, who's a teenager, and I just worry about fascination with fire. He hasn't done anything dangerous or anything, but I just worry about it. Okay, I don't like having flames around kids. So I really like the idea that this is hard to manage, and that at the same time it's very reliable. It's a very nice tool, and it's just a neat little tool instead of having matches or lighters around the house. I really kind of like that. So this is just an electric lighter, and the benefit, it's easy to light my candles. It's easy to store it. My kid is really unsure what it is. I really like it. Put a lid on it. Nothing much going on this week. I got a little bit of an acid attack. My GERD has been under great control for months with keto and with watching my acid intake. But I was drinking so much tea, I started to get a little bit of GERD. Now, I did realize when I eat food with my acid, I do okay. It's when I just drink extra acid during the day. So I've kind of slowed that down. In the meantime, I think I told you about the chocolate tea problem from Harney and Sons. I finally just tossed the chocolate tea, and I haven't had any of the chocolate chai. I'm waiting to see if I get desperate enough to drink it. But I did note that others of my readers are familiar with Plum Deluxe, and I remember Jasmine was pushing them a while back. It's really good stuff, and again, of all the tea companies, they're the one that is refusing to put sugar in their mixes, so I'm very grateful to them. All right, so I don't have much to say there. Apart from that, in the blather, I am studying my ASL vocabulary again, getting ready for that class to start. I may not take it because I can't figure out a way to work my schedule for it. In the meantime, I could take another Deaf Studies class on Wednesday nights. I'd have to go down to campus at least half the semester, but it's Wednesday nights 7 to 9, so I could take that class, and at least I'd be continuing, but I'm really worried about getting 102 in. I'm really worried about it. I'm worried about losing my 101. I'm already forgetting vocabulary. In the meantime, the pup date. No news on Captain. She's doing great. She had her nose biopsy. They put one little stitch in her nose, and she's doing really well. She came home, had one sleepy morning, and then was fine. And she's been taking her antibiotics and her painkiller. She's now past the painkiller and only has one antibiotic pill left as I record this. Funny thing about Captain, she's such a trooper. I would give her cheese with the pill in it, And she would eat the cheese, and the pill would drop out. She'd just lean over and eat the pill, too. It's really hilarious. She's feeling great, and it's obvious she's feeling really good. But we haven't gotten anything back on the biopsy. She goes in another week to get that worked out. Actually, it's not even a week. I think it's the 23rd. And Queenie is slowing down. Oh, we pray for it. She's a very smart dog, and so she actually is very hyper, but she's also figuring out what she is and isn't allowed to do. So I say in a very cautious way, now I think she's about 8 months old, no peeing in the house and no eating yarn. But she will bring me things. So, I'll be sitting in the living room and Queenie will come dancing out with a ball of yarn in her mouth, and she'll just hand it to me or drop it in front of me. It won't be all slimied up and she hasn't chewed on it. So that's pretty good. The hub state, finally he's feeling better. What a relief that he seems to be healthier and to feel better. The antibiotics worked. Oh gosh, I'm glad that's over with. So he's doing okay, which leads me to say on the calendar, the Grand Canyon, June 5th through 9th, is still tentatively on. Sunnybank, August 17th to 21st. I'm not real big on a cross-country flight at this point. We'll see. Minerva gets the last word, interfere with class. There is a picture of her. She is lying against what I would call my yarn basket with yarn for Romeo 2022. She would call it her snack basket or her picnic basket. That several times a day I have to intervene so that she doesn't go in there and eat yarn. I did put it on the dresser by my bed. I woke up the next morning. She had bitten the yarn between the ball and the project, but she didn't seem to eat any of it. So she's doing just fine. So she's lying there being beautiful. If you're going to demand attention, you've got to interfere and interfere hard, but you've got to do it with real class. So there she is against her snack basket, saying don't just take it passively, interfere, but try to be classy like a cat. Don't just randomly interfere. Do it in a way that's, cat cool. So on that happy note, here we sit in Scrapland with me trying to put together which of the many projects at my feet I'd like to start. And believe me, there are a lot of candidates right now. But I hope everybody is doing well. Remember the basics. Wear your mask, wash your hands, get your shots, socially distance. But most of all, remember we're a community, and so we do best when we're taking care of each other. That will protect us too. So please, stay safe, take care of each other, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye. So we have come to the end of another episode of Cognitive. Please do not use this podcast to diagnose yourself. If you think you are having a mental health problem, please contact a licensed mental health professional. Show notes for these episodes can be found at cognitivepodcast, all one word, .blogspot.com. Episodes can be found at iTunes under the name Cognitive Podcast, but also can be found posted next to the show notes on the Blogspot page. Thank you so much for listening. Everybody, stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.